How to Bury a Millionaire is a really great episode of Frasier. This is the 7th episode of the 6th season. This is directed by Pamela Fryman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the events in the episode and share some thoughts. And it starts off with Martin and Frasier in a car, and they establish that they're taking Niles out for something to eat to boost his spirits because he's not being feeling great. And while they're driving along, they happen to look to their right, and they see somebody in a hatchback, and they realise that this is Niles. And Niles sees them and he speeds away. And they call him up on the car phone and he denies it completely. And sometime later we're back in Niles' apartment, and he has to admit that he's having a lot of financial difficulties because of the legal battle he's in with Maris. And I love how this scene played out. He'd also recently purchased Noel Coward's pen, which would have cost quite a bit. And meanwhile, Martin is trying to get Niles some aspirin for his sore shoulder, and he's getting very lost in the apartment. And the longer this scene goes on, the more elaborate we realise this apartment is. And Martin gets lost in the wrapping room, the gift wrapping room, and he then gets stuck behind a bookcase. And it's a bookcase disguised as a door, which is an absolute dream. And to get out, Niles tells Martin, just poke Mrs. Dalloway on the bottom, which, as a Virginia Woolf fan, I rather enjoyed. And Frasier tells Niles, your rent is a lot, so why don't you just come and stay with me before your next rent is due? I'm assuming he just has to give a month's notice on the lease. And that in itself is quite surprising for a very expensive apartment. I would have imagined he would have had to have given more than a month's notice, but nevertheless, he explains, though, Niles doesn't want to do this. He explains, getting in here after Maris dumped me proved I was not a complete failure. And I think that that's such a great thing for Niles to reveal, because it's not just he wants the swanky apartment, he wants the 3 floors, he wants the gift wrapping room and the study and the secret bookcase. It means so much more to him than that. It proves to him that he is still somebody and he still has some worth. Of course, there are other things about him that proves he has worth, but the fact that he can get in there shows that he is a valued member of society. And obviously, they don't just let anybody in this building. So I think that was a really important thing to include there, and I think it really helped to show that it's not just about the physical building, but about what it represents. But he realises he can't afford it anymore. He hasn't got a choice. So we cut to Niles in the apartment with Frasier and with Daphne. He threw out Daphne's Bovril, which in itself is annoying, but also I'm Team Marmite, so I wasn't that annoyed. If he'd thrown out Marmite, that would have been really infuriating. And he's then sleeping in Frasier's room and honestly causing a lot of noise. But also I'm on Niles' side because, especially in summer, I love sleeping with a fan on, and I'm very sensitive to noise. So I like having white noise while I sleep. So I'm with him, but I also feel like this scene dragged on a good couple of minutes longer than I think it needed to be. The pacing for this scene wasn't great. I think they milked it for more than was necessary. We then cut to Cafe Nervosa. Roz is there, and she's supposed to be there with Frasier for an interview, and she uses the interviewer's phone and pretends to call Frasier and pretends that Frasier's at the ER, his appendix has burst, and he can't make it. And then, of course, at that exact moment, Frasier comes rushing in, and it's a little bit of silly humour. It worked really well, and I rather enjoyed it. And Roz revealed that she actually saw Niles recently in line to go to the movies, which, first of all, is money Niles probably shouldn't be spending while he gets his affairs in order, but also he's not apartment hunting, which he is supposed to be doing, and he has to confess to Frasier that he hasn't been doing this. So Frasier takes him apartment hunting, and their faces, their expressions when they go to the Shangri-La apartment, it's tiny, it's cramped, there are some suspicious things about it, their faces are brilliant, and of course, Frasier, wanting Niles out of his apartment, tries to convince Niles that actually, no, it's a really nice place and it would be really good for you to live here. And Niles ends up taking the apartment because really, well, I was going to say what other choice does he have, but depending on his budget, it does sound like maybe that's all he can afford just now. I feel like maybe they could have looked at a few more places, but nevertheless, he takes the apartment at the Shangri-La, and we cut to sometime later, and he's cancelled his date with Frasier, and Frasier is feeling very guilty because he feels like he forced Niles into leasing this apartment, which, to be fair, he kind of did. And he also immediately went and bought Noel Coward's pen after Niles returned it. I feel like that's not something that could have been easily returned. I mean, I assume he sold it back, but I imagine there would have been a financial loss there. It seems like something he probably could have just held on to. If he's saving a lot of money by staying at the Shangri-La, I feel like he could have at least kept the pen, but also it's a pen. So Frasier feels guilty about buying this immediately after Niles had to sell it, and he and Martin go over to Niles' apartment to check on him because they're really worried about him. And he's wearing a beach shirt, he looks very different, and he says everything's fine and he's doing okay, and that's clearly not the case. And he phones Maris in a panic, and then at the last second he turns it around and he pretends he's phoning Maris just to give her his new forwarding address. And I think that there are two significant things about this. The first is that Niles realised quite quickly that going grovelling to Maris wasn't going to solve anything, and that's ultimately not what he wanted. He wants to have this clean break from Maris as much as possible. But the other significant thing is that he was able to tell Maris he was staying at the Shangri-La, and that's going to hurt his pride. And to admit that to Maris, that's going to hurt. And I think that that's a really significant thing for him to have done, and it was really, really well done and beautifully delivered. And then Martin and Frasier decide to take him out to eat at a nice restaurant because, as Frasier said, just because you're living here doesn't mean you have to eat like you live here. And they're there to look after him, and they're there for him, and it's a really sweet moment, and I rather enjoyed it. It is obviously quite a shift from Niles' apartment. Where's the bird? Did we see the bird? Does he still have baby? Did we find that out? I can't remember. I've seen the show before, but I can't remember the specifics. Please tell me they didn't say what they were doing with the bird in this episode and I just completely glossed over it. I'm sure we'll find out in due course, or we found out in this episode and for some reason I didn't absorb that information. Either way, I think that How to Bury a Millionaire is a really brilliant episode of Frasier. Definitely some great moments for Niles. A little bit of a pacing issue here and there, but in general, I thought it was a really interesting episode, and I'm sure it's one that I will always really thoroughly enjoy.